Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Thursday everybody. A few hours ago I posted a standalone video on the undiagnosed pneumonia outbreak in China. This episode will look at different stories. For those interested in the pneumonia episode, this is the last episode from a few hours ago. First up for today though, Beijing is making its biggest push yet to stabilize China's years-long housing crisis with a massive bailout package intended to plug an approximately $500 billion shortfall needed to deliver millions of unfinished apartments. As we covered last week, Nomura analysts conservatively estimate that China has over 20 million unfinished homes that were sold but not delivered. Households have purchased these homes with mortgages which are on banks' asset sheets, but they have not been finished and developers don't have the liquidity to finish them. Beijing understands that if mismanaged, this is a social, political, and financial crisis waiting to happen. Now, also, potential home buyers have lost confidence in the housing market because they fear developers won't be able to complete their projects, creating a vicious cycle of falling new home sales. To make matters worse, as more developers fall into financial distress, the funding gap required to complete projects gets even wider. For the 38 builders that have defaulted, around 3.6 trillion yuan will be needed to achieve 100% project completion, according to HSBC Holdings PLC. A year ago, the People's Bank of China pledged a total of 550 billion yuan, $77 billion, to help complete delayed projects via policy bank loans and a re-lending facility. However, a year later, not much of this has been used because many developers are not eligible for the bank loans and banks have been hesitant to lend. As of September, commercial banks have taken up only 3% of the zero-cost loan quota, according to the central bank's latest quarterly update. The central government now appears to recognize that it has to reach into its own pockets, as well as push banks harder to lend to get these apartments finished. More media outlets are confirming what we covered earlier this week too, that Beijing policymakers are finalizing a draft list of 50 developers eligible for financial support that includes Country Garden Holdings Co. and Sino-Ocean Group. US outlet Bloomberg reports today that while developer stocks climbed in recent days, many investors remain wary authorities haven't gone far enough to rekindle growth in a vital area for the broader economy, and that the push to bail out developers, quote, is likely to further squeeze profits at the nation's largest lenders, end quote. There are often no solutions, just trade-offs. The $56 trillion banking industry, Bloomberg writes, has been battling shrinking margins and rising bad loans since they were drafted by authorities to backstop the economy and prevent risk spillover from the sluggish property sector. Authorities had guided banks to trim deposit rates 3 times over the past year to ease their margin pressure and slashed banks' reserve requirements twice this year to boost their lending capacity. Quote, net interest margins of the big state-owned banks dropped to a record low 1.74% at the end of the first half of 2023, below the industry's 1.8% threshold seen as necessary to remain a responsible amount of profitability, end quote. Adding, a Bloomberg index of Hong Kong-listed Chinese banks tumbled as much as 18% this year from a high in May. If Beijing does end up plugging the financing hole for these millions of homes, it will represent a global financial crisis level bailout effort. Nomura Holdings Inc. estimates that the total funding gap to complete the remaining housing units would be around 3.2 trillion yuan. In 2008, Beijing rolled out a 4 trillion yuan stimulus package, and the bailout program which the US government implemented at the time would have been worth about 5 trillion yuan. And remember, this is just to get homes, which have already been sold and paid for, completed. It does not guarantee that it will revive new home sales going forward. If you're enjoying today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below for anyone who can help keep the channel financially sustainable. Let's move on with the next story. Next up, updates related to the tensions in the South China Sea. On his way back from APEC, Philippines President Marcos stopped in Hawaii to have meetings at US Indo-Pacific Command and gave a speech at a think tank, the Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies. The speech was fairly boilerplate. We note a few extracts here. Quote, "Tensions in the West Philippine Sea are growing, and persistent unlawful threats and challenges against Philippine sovereign rights and jurisdiction over our exclusive economic zone and the continental shelf, actions that violate obligations under international law. So, I've said it before and I will say it again, the Philippines will not give a single square inch of our territory to any foreign power. The law is clear, as defined by the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea and the final and binding 2016 award on the South China Sea arbitration." End quote. Regular viewers understand the background to the Sierra Madre, the ship grounded at 2nd Thomas Shoal, so we will not unpack it here again. For today, we have two salient developments to cover. First, Japanese financial media outlet Nikkei Asia reports that the US has begun advising the Philippines on how to repair the World War II-era warship, quote, "demonstrating Washington's commitment to protecting Manila's maritime rights in the face of growing tensions with China." End quote. The Sierra Madre will sink without maintenance, but Beijing has shown that it does not intend to allow this maintenance to take place. A senior Philippine official told Nikkei that Manila and Washington, quote, "have begun informal discussions about the vessel's structure as a part of efforts to draft a concrete repair plan. One of the issues under discussion is how long Sierra Madre can remain in place without repair. Developing a timeline is critical to determining how much time the Allies have to work with." End quote. Second, the US and the Philippines have started joint air and sea patrols in the South China Sea, with the first joint patrol starting on Tuesday at the northernmost point of Philippine territory in the Bashi Channel south of Taiwan, and will move west into the South China Sea proper. UK-based The Financial Times writes that, quote, "unlike the maritime patrols Duterte ended, the current event involves aircraft. The Philippine military said it was sending 3 Navy ships and 3 warplanes, and they would be joined by a US naval littoral combat ship and a maritime patrol and reconnaissance aircraft." End quote. The US 7th Fleet said the patrols were part of routine American interaction with its allies and partners in, quote, "preserving a free and open Indo-Pacific region." End quote. Obviously, Beijing is not happy with any of this. Yesterday, Wednesday, a spokesperson of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs expressed, quote, "the patrol should not harm China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests." End quote. Zhang Junshe, a Chinese naval expert speaking to state media the same day, expressed, quote, "the Philippines' attempt to seek the external forces' support to serve its own selfish demand will worsen the South China Sea situation and harm regional peace and stability." End quote. In a special editorial published today, state-run Global Times argued, quote, "through investigation and verification, the Global Times has discovered a resonance between the Philippines and some Western media in the production of fake news on the South China Sea issue as they attempt to converge and create false narrative that portrays China as aggressive, domineering, and a bully to smaller nations. Such deliberate efforts to create confusion will not help resolve the South China Sea issue, but instead damage peace and stability in the region." End quote. Adding, quote, "the Philippines has become increasingly aggressive, testing China's limits." End quote. In this information environment, it is no surprise that many regular Chinese genuinely believe that they are victims of aggressive bullying and threats to sovereignty from a US-backed Philippines in the South China Sea, and that all international criticism is merely the fruits of Western propaganda. We can expect tensions in the region to continue. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.